Now, slowing economic growth out of China, just one of the headwinds Malaysia is dealing with, on top of lingering global supply chain issues and, of course, the war in Ukraine. The country's also still battling, like many other nations in the world, the pressure of higher prices. However, Malaysia's inflation rate of 3.4% is among the lowest in Southeast Asia, thanks to record government subsidies, they say, keeping a lid on rising prices. Economic growth numbers are also strong, and the second quarter looking good. However, the problem with those record subsidies, sky-high debt. Still, Malaysia's finance minister says the country is not at risk of any kind of economic collapse, similar to what's being seen in Sri Lanka at this moment. We have much to discuss. Joining us now is Malaysian Finance Minister Tengku Zafrul Aziz. Minister Zafrul, fantastic to have you on the show. Let's start with what you've been discussing now for many months, which is the challenge for the Malaysian people, and that's pricing pressures, food, fuel, across the board, and of course the challenge of dealing with it. Is that the same today?
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for having me here. It's good to see you live. On Malaysia, I think you've summed it up quite well just now. We have inflation under control relative to our neighbours and relative to what we're seeing in the rest of the world. Inflation is forecasted to be between 2.2% to 3.2%. In fact, first 6 months of the year, inflation is around 2.5%. And that's largely due to the large size of subsidy that we have introduced. And we are forecasting it to be around 80 billion ringgit. That's close to 20 billion US dollars. So we have capped especially the essential items, especially fuel. Fuel is at about 40 cents per litre, right? That's one of the cheapest in the world. But the concern is, of course, when you said, what is the impact to our fiscal? Is there a fiscal constraint? The answer is actually, Julia, we still have fiscal space. Our debt to GDP is at 60%, our statutory debt over GDP. We have imposed a ceiling by Parliament at 65%, so there's still room. And we're still maintaining our target deficit at 6%. We are obviously a commodity export country. We do benefit from the stronger commodity prices, especially the prices in oil. The budget, for example, assumed oil price at $66, and today, as you know, it's much higher than that, just slightly below $100. And all the subsidies means that if we didn't do it, we didn't implement the subsidies. Actually, our Department of Statistics said that our inflation could be around 11%.
Wow. I mean, subsidies, as you know as well as I do, and many people will be looking, introduce other challenges. But to your point, I think with the pricing pressure issue, this is what you focus on first. So let's break it down. As you said, near $20 billion worth of subsidies this year, and I believe that is a record. You are also looking at the efficiency, I know, of those subsidies as well. Can you just confirm that there will be no cuts, even when you look at the efficiencies? As far as the people are concerned, you're not going to remove any of those subsidies this year, and you will find the money to finance them, because by your own admission, the revenues this year are not going to be enough to finance them, so you are going to have to raise money some other way.
Yes, you're right, Julia. We are not planning to reduce the subsidies this year. We are slowly recovering from what we all went through. The pandemic, COVID-19, has really impacted the economy. We're slowly opening up. The borders have opened up. The economic sectors have opened up. And the first quarter GDP growth was a strong one, 5%. And second quarter looks stronger. And we do not want to, pull the handbrake too soon. So we have seen that subsidies does help the economy, but like you said, it is not sustainable to continue this kind of subsidies in the longer term. But in the short term, it's something that we need to do. But in the longer term, the subsidy has to be more targeted. Today, it's a blanket subsidy. Everyone gets. Someone who is the top 20% of the population continues to enjoy the subsidies. That's the same amount of subsidy as the bottom 40% of our population, for example. And as you know, the rich consume more, so they actually benefit more from the subsidy. So in the longer term, you're right, it's not sustainable. But in the short to medium term, especially in the short term in this case, we need to contain. We need to be responsive of what's happening today in Malaysia. And of course, it's similar to what's happening globally. Having said that, we are cautious as well. Monetary policy is tightening also in Malaysia, right? We have increased gradually in phases by 25 basis points a few months ago and another 25 basis points a month ago. So it's about 50 basis points, but it's still below our rates are still below what it was before pre-pandemic.
You understand, I think, better than most, the delicate balancing act that many political leaders have been through over the past few years, which is trying to support your economy, keep your people happy, maintain the confidence of international financial markets as well, which is something that tends to be forgotten as people are dealing with the ordinary challenges of living. Your FDI flows have remained solid. The trade figures look strong, which is part of the benefit, I think, of being a net commodity exporter in these kind of moments. But I want to tackle something that I've seen written about in the press, which is comparisons between Malaysia and the economic challenges in Sri Lanka at this moment. Not today in Sri Lanka, but the progression and the economic deterioration. Can you just explain to our viewers and perhaps also to your people why the situation isn't similar and why you'll continue to maintain the confidence of financial markets in particular?
Thank you, Julia. Well, if you compare the economies of Sri Lanka and Malaysia, it's very different. We are much more diversified. Sri Lanka is very much focused on tourism. We obviously, like you mentioned, we are net exporter of commodities, for example. Our reserves is about 106 billion US dollars compared to Sri Lanka is only 3 billion US dollars. And and our debt to GDP, as I mentioned just now, is around 60%, whereas Sri Lanka is above 100%. And more importantly, if we look at where we are today in terms of our borrowings, our foreign denominated borrowings only 2.5% of our total debt. So 97.5% is actually in ringgit, our borrowings. So we are less. And then, of course, Sri Lanka is facing a twin deficit, and we are not.
Yeah, I mean, there are significant differences in the baseline economics between the two countries. It's the fiscal prudency, I think, from here on out that is the key. And as you've said, you maintain eyes on it. Can Malaysia avoid a recession, given that it is such an open economy, if we do see even a soft recession in the United States, a potentially likely recession, I guess, in the EU, and, of course, slowing growth in China, who is your largest trade partner?
Yeah, for Malaysia, we are optimistic that this year we will post a positive growth between 5.3 and 6.3%. As I mentioned, we know our first quarter result, that's around 5%, and second quarter even a bit stronger than that. And our third quarter, by definition, our third quarter last year was actually negative. So the third quarter this year will continue to be positive. So we are quite optimistic that it will be, despite the slowdown in the US. And you're right, we are an open economy. Trade to GDP is 120%, but the concern will be 2023. Right, 2023 will be a challenge. We will need to see how the world economy performs then, and that's when I think we really need to relook at some of our policies. But what's important is we must be prepared that the global economy is slowing down.
I think also what was lost in the past few days was a visit by the US Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Malaysia, as well as other nations in the region, which I do think is important for us all to note. But obviously the tensions between China, between Taiwan in particular, but obviously we can add in the United States, has been very much watched here. Can I ask how closely you're watching it? And just as a hypothetical, what a blockade of the Taiwan Straits would mean for Malaysia's economy and for the region in terms of economic outlook, because it is, of course, a key trade route.
Yeah, well, China is very important to Malaysia in terms of trade. This is our biggest trading partner. There will be risks of slowdown if that happens. As finance minister, we're monitoring this very closely from the economic perspective. Like I said, China is a major trading partner to Malaysia, and we've seen Malaysia's economic performance is also dependent on how China tackles its own COVID policy. It's been very conservative and it's affected our supply chain, for example. So if anything happens with Taiwan, we will definitely have to monitor this very, very closely, as it will have impact. Regional stability is crucial for our recovery.
And policy would adjust accordingly, because it would have to.
It will have to. You're right, Julia. It will have to. Everything's very fluid, and we will monitor this closely.
Can I ask you about your personal political ambitions? And I'm sort of smiling as I say it because again, a lot has been made of this. You've been made the treasurer of the political coalition that we're well known by Malaysians. Can I ask what your political ambitions are? And admittedly, you have to focus on the job at hand now, but do you have ambitions, perhaps, maybe to lead the country one day? I'm smiling, by the way, as I ask this question. Yes.
I don't know how to answer that question, but I think that's the toughest question for today.
I do my best.
Thank you for that question, Julia. Yes, well, my focus is really a service to the nation. I'm a senator today, and it's a limited term formally in Parliament. As a senator in Parliament in Malaysia, you serve a limited term for 6 years. And if you want to continue to serve the nation, you need to be actively involved in politics, right? So my focus now is on continuing to the fiscal reform, and to continue in the longer term. I've decided to go into politics and play a role in a political party.
As you found over the last 2 years, that responsibility can mean tough decisions. It can mean unpopular decisions. And I think as we look around the world, we've seen leaders that have decided to perhaps make populist decisions, make promises perhaps that they can't keep. How do you avoid those kind of choices, maintain truth, even when actually telling the truth may harm you politically? How do you find that balance?
Well, there is, to me, doing the right thing. You just have to do it. There's no trade-off for that. What's important is people understand why you make that tough decision. Always, the problem with making tough decisions is you do not find the time, and the best way is to communicate this well, right? We need stronger stakeholder management, and we have done that, and we made a lot of tough decisions, especially during the crisis, pandemic COVID-19 crisis. So I think communication will be key, and best to also focus on the nation reform. Yeah,
talk to the people. Sir, great to chat to you.
Yes,
come back and talk to us soon, please, and we'll track your progress. Malaysian Finance Minister there, Tengku Zafrul Aziz. Sir, thank you for your time. Thank you.